It's me, the New Wave Sage, and today I want to tell you the origin story of one of my favorite bands, The Cars. I first got into The Cars at the end of the 70s when their debut album came out. I was in high school at the time, and I remember thinking that since the band was new wave, that meant the band must be brand new. I thought they were like Boston area college kids who got together and put an album out that same year. But nothing could have been further from the truth. The duo at the heart of the Cars had been musical partners since the end of the 60s. The two, who were basically complete opposites of each other, were first in a band together in 1969. Over the next 2 decades, they performed as everything from a folk rock coffee shop duo to a 70s yacht rock band. The story of the Cars is really the story of these two very different musicians. Meet Benny Orzechowski, who was born to Eastern European immigrant parents in Ohio. Growing up, his nickname was Benny 11 Letters, as the other kids couldn't figure out how to pronounce his last name. Benny 11 Letters, or Ben Orr, as he went by in the Cars, was a musician's musician. Ben was good-looking and charismatic. He had a great singing voice and could play the bass, drums, and guitar. As soon as he could, Ben started playing in bands. Here he is in high school playing drums with a band called the Cyclones. Ben eventually joined a band called the Grasshoppers, now playing bass, which was the instrument he played in the Cars. The Grasshoppers put out this single, Mod Socks, in 1965. The Grasshoppers were the house band for a Cleveland music show called Upbeat. They opened for some fairly big bands during this time and seemed on the verge of making it. However, on the verge of stardom, Ben and two other members of the band got drafted to serve in Vietnam. After about a year in the Army, Ben eventually got a family deferment since he was responsible for taking care of his non-English speaking mother. But the whole experience left him shaken. He went from being gregarious and confident to suddenly feeling lost and unsure of himself. Now meet the other side of this duo, Richard Ocasek. Like Ben, Richard, or Rick Ocasek, as he went by in the Cars, was a son of Eastern European immigrant parents, growing up in Baltimore. But that's where the similarities end. Rick was a gangly, nerdy, and very introverted kid who went by the nickname Noodle. Rick grew up in a violent and abusive household. He was drawn to solitary pursuits like photography, spending hours alone in his parents' basement. Also, unlike Ben, Rick never saw himself as a musician. What he really wanted to do was be a songwriter or producer, and he was drawn to folk music like Joan Baez or Bob Dylan. Rick's family moved to Ohio, where Rick went to Bowling Green University. His actual first encounter with Ben was seeing him playing with the Grasshoppers on Upbeat and being really impressed with him. In 1968, Rick went with some friends to the famous Cleveland club La Cave. There he saw a band that was to change his life. That band was the Velvet Underground. Rick in particular was taken with the Velvet Underground's lead singer, Lou Reed. At times in the Cars, Rick even seemed to imitate Reed's singing style and look. Rick once described his idea for the Cars as being the Velvet Underground meets the Carpenters. Inspired by the Velvets, Rick started his first band, a psychedelic rock band, Id Nirvana. In 1969, Ben Orr saw the band performing and asked Rick if he could join. As Rick recalled it, next day he joined that band and every band I had up to and through to the Cars. He was my best friend. We were practically married. The two were natural collaborators, with Rick doing most of the songwriting, but recognizing when Ben had the stronger voice for a particular song. Up until 1971, the two played in various groups in Ohio and Michigan. The closest they came to getting a record deal at this point was with the band Leatherwood. I couldn't find any trace of what this band sounded like online, but check out this sweet promotional picture of Ben and Rick. In 1971, Rick moved to Boston, later convincing Ben to come join him there. Boston in the early 70s had a really thriving local music scene. On his first day in Boston, Rick heard a band playing at the Cambridge Common that influenced him almost as much as the Velvet Underground. That band was the Modern Lovers.
Drive past the Stop and Shop with the radio on. I'm in love with Massachusetts.
Rick was in particular impressed by the drummer of Modern Lovers, David Robinson. He thought he had an incredible style and look, as well as being just a rock-solid drummer. David Robinson would later become the Cars' drummer, and his contributions to the band can't be understated. He was the one who insisted the band needed a more striking modern fashion look. Robinson was also the one who came up with the band's name and distinctive logo. But that was in the future. Rick right away got into Boston's music scene, starting a band called Milkwood. Rick soon realized that he needed his old partner Ben back with him, so he convinced Ben to move to Boston in 1972 and join Milkwood. Ben joined Milkwood as the bassist, which was the instrument he would later play in the Cars. In 1972, Milkwood put out an album, How's the Weather?, which has a strong Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young sound to it.
And I ask you one more time, if you find me in your mind.
There's a new book about the Cars, Let the Stories Be Told, by Bill Janovitz, and he really talks about this era in some depth, about how the record executives kind of took advantage of the two of them, and Rick had almost like a mini panic attack in the studio about the strength of his voice. About the only positive from this experience is that they got to meet Greg Hawkes, who played saxophone on this album. Greg would later play keyboards for the Cars, and it's probably his keyboard work more than anything else that made people call the Cars new wave. Unsure of where to go from here musically, Rick asked for advice from Jonathan Richman, the lead singer of the Modern Lovers. Richman was probably the only person who was a bigger fan of the Velvet Underground than Rick. In fact, he had slept on the Velvet Underground's couch for a while before he finally moved to Boston to bring the gospel of VU there. He encouraged Rick to go back to his vision of a band combining the Velvet Underground with pop sensibilities, even suggesting a name, Richard and the Rabbits. In 1974, Rick and Ben formed Richard and the Rabbits. This band has a very yacht rock sound to it and features Ben Orr primarily on vocals.
Wants to take you in, fill your cup. She's just your style. She wants to have you stay a while.
In 1976, Rick and Ben morphed into their final pre-Cars version, Captain Swing. The five-member band featured a different drummer and bassist in the Cars at this point, but did feature the addition of Elliot Easton on guitar. Elliot Easton was eventually to be the Cars' lead guitarist, and he's a huge part of why the band sounded so modern at the end of the 70s. A lot of 70s guitarists were really into extended long solos, but not Easton. He has a really fresh, modern-sounding approach to the guitar. Captain Swing went under the tagline "An Almost Famous Rock Band," and they started building a following in the Boston area, with the band soon coming to the attention of WBCN disc jockey Maxine Sartori, who began playing songs from their demo tape on her show.
I can't do this way much longer, expecting to survive. All those hidden innuendos waiting to arrive.
Captain Swing was often compared to Steely Dan in this incarnation, and half the band were happy with that, but it wasn't what Rick and Ben envisioned. Eventually, the final version of the Cars formed, with Ben Orr taking over on bass and singing many of the songs, Greg Hawkes being brought in on keyboard, and David Robinson taking over on drums. There's a lot more to talk about with the Cars, but that will have to be for a future episode. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and consider subscribing. Be safe, have fun, and remember, new wave to the grave, my friends.